Hi, I'm Eduardo Neret with Campus Reform. Joining us today is conservative commentator, author, and filmmaker Dinesh D'Souza, who's out with his new movie Trump Card right here before the election, perhaps one of his most important films ever. Dinesh, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, it's my pleasure.
Well, I want to ask you about the movie first and foremost. You know, every few years when I watch one of your movies, I sort of get away leaving with the feeling that now is more important than ever. You know, the election that's coming up is more important than ever. Talk to me a little bit about why Trump card, why now? It seems sort of every 4 years we're just facing a greater and greater threat that you talk about in your movies, whether it's coming from the left, the political establishment. So talk to me a little bit about why you decided to make Trump card and why to you it's different than any other film that you've made.
Let's talk about the stakes for a moment. I think if Trump loses the election, the left will make a supreme effort to discredit Trumpism, sort of eradicate it from the stain of American history. They'll try to make it seem like an ugly blip on the landscape that should never happen again. And they'll go after not just Trump, but the Trumpsters, any of us who have been supporters of Trump. If Trump wins, he has a chance to do what Reagan did with 2 terms, which is have a profound change, not only on our public policy, but also on the cultural landscape. Think of it. Trump will have had 3 nominees to the court in the first term. He could have 2 more in the second term. Think of what that means. One guy can basically make the court. Also, Trump has not been able to clean out the deep state. No significant indictments yet. That becomes an agenda for the second term. Now, turning to the movie, I think it's my most important movie. My Obama and Hillary movies focused a lot on an individual, Obama, on Hillary. And they both also had a lot of history in them. This movie has less history. There's a window into history, but there's so much craziness going on around us that most of the movie is about today and tomorrow. So it lays out the threat of socialism. The movie is loosely based on my book, The United States of Socialism. It lays out the socialist threat. It lays out the socialist tactics. And then it looks at Trump as a sort of political general in the fight against socialism.
And so, you know, talking about your movies on Obama and Hillary and the threats that their presidencies would have been to the country at the time, did you ever think back in 2016 or, you know, maybe shortly after when President Trump won, that he wouldn't even be really facing an opponent anymore? You know, it's bigger than Joe Biden in many ways. Like you said, it is a system he is facing, an entrenched establishment, an entrenched deep state, all of this opposition coming from many different areas. You know, did anything surprise you in doing the movie and doing research for the movie? Again, I know you're someone who has studied these trends for many years. So, did you expect this to sort of happen now? And did you learn anything that will surprise us viewers?
I think that the socialist story that we tell in the movie is very unique because we don't take the standard conservative line that socialism has never worked before, therefore it can never work again. We have a new type of socialism that's married to identity politics, and I call it identity socialism. So I spell out the implications of this. Why is it that we talk more about race than we talk about class? Why is it that so many leftists care more about culture than they do about economics? Marx was all about economics, but we have people, socialists today, who care more about abortion than the minimum wage. They care more about the transgender bathroom than universal basic income. And then Trump. How do you make sense of this anomaly of Trump? I mean, many Republicans are still pining for the Reagan years, but let's remember in the Reagan years, our opponent, it was a Cold War against the Soviet Union. Now we're in a kind of cold civil war, and our opponent is domestic. So it's a little bit more of a parallel to Lincoln than it is to Reagan. And I think that calls for a different set of tactics, and Trump, in that sense, is the man of the hour.
Something about President Trump that I'm sure your movie will touch upon a little bit is his broad appeal past, what you talk about is traditional conservatism, traditional Reaganism, and how there are Americans of all political stripes previously who are now looking at President Trump as someone they would vote for and someone they support. What type of reach are you anticipating for this new movie? Have you been able to reach people that go beyond, again, traditional GOP, traditional conservatives, conservative background over the last few years? Are you seeing your base, your audience expand in the same way that Trump has expanded the political right over the last few years?
Well, this movie is the first one that I'm not releasing in the theater. The reason is some theaters are closed. I didn't want it to be where some people can see the movie, other people can't. Now, I think it is fair to say that when the movie's in the theater, you're going to get mainly conservatives and Republicans who jump in their car and go down to a theater to watch a documentary. That's going to be a kind of niche audience. But the good news is this movie, this week, October 9th, is available on demand to anyone. And so people sitting at home can round up their family, get on your big screen TV, just order it right off Amazon Prime or order it right off Google or right off Apple iTunes. So just the normal way you watch movies at home, it'll be on all the major platforms, Dish Network. So it's a pay-per-view movie. And it's also, of course, available on the physical DVD. So trumpcardthemovie.com is basically where to go. It'll tell you how to get it, but it's a one-click and you can rent it or buy it, either one.
Yeah, we'll definitely send viewers that way. I want to change gears here a little bit, and I know you saw this because I saw you do a video on it. But at Campus Reform, we cover campus bias in the classroom, whether it's against someone as high up in political office like President Trump, or even conservative commentators. And so you were the target of a professor at Syracuse a few weeks ago who said, your ideology, your writings, your work was not an acceptable viewpoint in his classroom. Talk to me a little bit about not only, I guess, maybe opposition you have faced on campuses, but opposition, obviously your experience being charged with crimes under President Obama. You've faced opposition from the political left for a number of years. Has that changed? Has that gotten worse with President Trump as we've seen sort of the violence on the political left grow with President Trump? Have you seen an uptick in that on your end?
A couple of thoughts about that. On the campus front, I mean, the professor says in the statement, in effect, I'm all open to teaching conservatism. Now, he says I'm about to teaching about conservatism, giving the impression it's some sort of malady. But nevertheless, who's a more mainstream conservative than I am? I mean, look, I was the editor of the Dartmouth Review, which is one of the early youth conservative publications. I then went to work for the Heritage Foundation for its magazine policy review. I was in the Reagan White House. Then I was at the American Enterprise Institute, the most mainstream of conservative think tanks. Then the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. So if I'm not a legitimate conservative, who is? I mean, it's one thing to, this is a little bit of the CNN approach. Their idea of a conservative is to find a Republican who has burned their bridges in the Republican Party and is now making money from liberal donors who they can put the name Republican and is going to go on there and bash Trump. Maybe the professor's looking for someone like that, but that's a fraudulent enterprise. That's not genuine conservatism. Now, with regard to the atmosphere under Trump, yeah, when my case came up in 2013, I thought it was sort of unique. But now we've seen it with, it's basically a replay with Mike Flynn. And it's a replay with Trump. When I met with Trump, my family met with Trump last November, and he goes, Dinesh, what they tried to do to you, they're trying to do to me in a bigger way. And so he saw the resemblance between my case and his case, Trump did. And this reflects the fact that the left is perfectly willing to use the judicial system and use the organs, the police agencies of government to go after their opponents.
Well, something that you said a few minutes ago that I want to go back and touch upon is the question that we get here very often at Campus Reform. I think conservatives in positions like yours get very often, and that is how to change people's minds. If, for example, on college campuses, we see how biased these institutions are and how left-leaning some of the students are, or if we see in other institutions in the country, whether it's Hollywood, whether it's academia, whether it's media, how far left these institutions are, how do we convince the next generation? How do we open up the next generation to conservative ideas, to other ideas? And obviously, I know your movies, your books, your writings are a step in that and is something that has been effective for you. But for the movement overall, how have you seen that change and worsen over time? And how can we go back to freely exposing ideas to the next generation without being attacked for it?
The big difference between now and when I was a student is that when I was a student at Dartmouth, the campus was left-wing. But there were conservative professors, probably a dozen of them, and there was genuine debate on the campus, and even the liberals knew what conservatives think and vice versa. Now, when I speak on campus, I find that young people are not exposed to conservative ideas at all. They don't regard them as legitimate because they haven't been taught what they are. And they look at me as if I'm a creature from Mars because I'm saying things that they've never heard. And they can't believe is true. I have to literally say to them things like, take out your phone and pull up the Nazi 20-point platform and read it. State control of the banks, state control of healthcare, state control of churches, state control of education. Now, then I say, well, tell me, does this sound a little bit more like Trump? Or does it sound more like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders? In other words, is fascism on the left or on the right? According to the fascists themselves. So this kind of stuff is very persuasive to students, but of course professors do their best to leave this kind of information out, to spin the ball. A lot of what we call history is progressive history, and that's the scam I've been trying to bust up with my books and my movies.
I want to get into a little bit of current political events as we are now just several weeks away before the election. What are you predicting as we get near to election day and election night? Are you predicting a Trump victory? Are you predicting it's something that will have to be sort of fought in the courts and that we will find out several weeks later after election day? Are there any particular states you think are in play that Trump needs to focus on the most? I mean, what is your political analysis as we head into election season here just a few weeks out?
I hope it doesn't go to the courts. That would be a terrible way to resolve this. This happened once before in American history where there was a kind of a draw, and the net effect of it was a kind of ugly bargain in which the Republican candidate became the president, but the Republicans agreed to withdraw, to basically end Reconstruction and withdraw Republican forces from the South, the Democratic South. We don't want that. I think it will further fray the bonds of society, which are already kind of frayed. So I hope Trump wins in a landslide. My instinct is that he will, although I'm always on guard against my instinct because we should never confuse what we want to happen with what is going to happen. You know, going back to 2012, I would tell people, I think Romney is going to lose. And they'd be like, how can you say that? I thought you were a Republican. And I'm like, I am a Republican. I'm voting for Romney. But I want to make a distinction between what I want to happen and what is going to happen. And the same thing here. I think Trump's going to win, but I'm cautious about it. I look at the polls sort of carefully because although I think that they are rigged, and I do think that people are a little culturally intimidated in saying they are for Trump, so I think there's understated support for Trump, but I don't want to be too brash in my predictions. It's not even my field. My instinct is that the common sense of the American people will prevail, so I trust the common sense of the ordinary American to see through the media. They're so transparent, they're so vicious, they're so obvious that if you can't spot a crook there, I'm not sure when you can.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, especially from the perspective of whether it's Republican strategists or even Republican voters. They can't get too confident in our own side's effort to campaign. They can't get too confident in a victory because I think that will deter some hard work and some hard effort here in the last few weeks to actually make that happen. Should President Trump win, I mean, what are some things that you would like him to do in his second term that you really think, as you mentioned at the beginning of the interview, will cement him and his legacy and his presidency in a similar way to President Reagan? I mean, of course, President Trump in many ways has already done so many things that he will forever be remembered for some of his achievements. But what do you think he should focus on in the second term to cement his place in American history as one of our great presidents?
Number one, you have to root out the deep state. There's corruption in the deep state, and it's all at the top. There's nothing wrong with the ordinary FBI agent, but there's something wrong with the people running the FBI. And even the guys who aren't directly implicated are covering up for the others. So you need to put people in handcuffs. You need to indict them. You need to show that these thugs with badges can also be held accountable. Very important. Number two, I think we need a conservative court majority. We've been nominating namby-pamby justices from Sandra Day O'Connor to Souter, John Paul Stevens, Anthony Kennedy. I'm sick of these characters. Why can't we nominate people who we can rely on with the same Euclidean certainty that the left can? And number three, I think if Trump goes into the inner city, goes into the barrios, makes an open appeal for opportunity zones. See, with those people, you can't just tell them there's a ladder of opportunity. They need to see the ladder. But if they see the ladder, they see there's a way they can pull themselves up. They're not going to go for the vegetative dependency that the Democrats are all about. They'll take that over nothing. But if you show them that they can make their lives better on their own and be in the driver's seat of their own destiny, I mean, what human being is not going to affirm that approach and choose that over the lousy drone life that the Democrats have in store for us?
Well, let me ask you a little bit about that. The Trump campaign has made a lot of efforts and attempts at making inroads with those communities over the last 4 years. I think the jury's out on whether it's worked and whether it will work. There's some indications that the Hispanic community will support President Trump at a higher rate than any other Republican president before him. There's questions about the Black community, of course. Do you think those efforts are working? Do you think there are things that he should do differently in that regard? Or do you think we're going to see results this November and then only potential for those results to increase over the next 4 years if he wins?
I think solely by virtue of asking for the Black vote and the Latino vote. Look at the visibility of the Black issue. If you came from Mars and watched the Republican convention, you'd think that 40% of America is Black because there were just so many Black faces at the convention. So just by doing that, Trump will get, I think, a notch. He will gain Black votes. But I think the key longer term is you need to fix the education system in the inner city. You need to address the problem of family breakdown, and you need to create opportunities for enterprise, which means the places have to be safe. Businesses are not going to open up in a place where your windows are going to be broken the next day. So the Republicans have to realize realize this is not just about invoking opportunity or pointing to success stories. It's creating the infrastructure in which opportunity can actually take place.
Got a couple more questions for you. What do you think is the most important thing that the Republican Party has to do to attract voters for future generations? Some would say that part of the reason why it's been much more difficult for Republicans to win elections over the last few years is precisely because of something we cover, you know, the education system. It's hard when by the time students graduate and pass through the education system, most of them are already so ideologically tilted to the left. I'm sure there are elements that you would point to, you know, like the establishment, like the deep state, these other things that just generally make it more difficult for Republicans to win. But if there was one thing that you think the Republican Party has to focus on changing to ensure that we can have a fair shot at winning future elections, what would you say that is?
I would say that we need two things. One is a world-class online university that offers education at the level of the best colleges in the country at 1/3 of the price. In other words, we need to build the academic iPhone. Number two, I think we need a network, not a cable network, but a network like CBS or NBC, which has movies and talk shows and comedy and a lifestyle network. I think Trump can do that after the presidency because he has the following to do it. He has the money to do it. He has the contacts to do it. So we are sorely missing that. The left has tremendous reach through the media that we can only very pale way try to compete with. But without long term, if we allow the left to have the cultural virtual monopoly it has in education, in media, and entertainment, I don't see how we can win.
That's a great point. There's the element of the culture that conservatives definitely need to fight a way to get a foot in, and I'm sure you know more than most how difficult that is. Last question for you. You've had a wonderful career. You have Trump Card out on demand this week that I encourage all the viewers to go watch. Is there anything else in your career that you hope to do, a hill you haven't climbed, a mountain you haven't climbed, something that you would like to accomplish before it's all said and done?
Well, I just released a couple of weeks ago my first feature film. It's a political thriller called Infidel, starring Jim Caviezel. It's the first movie, as far as I know, that really takes on radical Islam, but it does so in a very complex way. Interestingly, it's got 90% on audience ratings, which I'm used to from my other movies, but it's got a pretty good critics rating, almost 60% from left-wing critics. And so I'm very proud of this. It's my effort to show, in Hollywood, the feature film is the gold standard, not the documentary. A lot of their ideological propaganda comes through feature films. So this is part of my larger project. We have to compete, not just in media, not just in education, but we got to make better movies than they do. And then we don't just complain about what we're doing, we show we can do it better.
Well, Mr. Dinesh D'Souza, thank you so much for joining us. I wish you the best of luck with Trump Card. Again, that is out this week on demand, Google Play, Amazon, iTunes, like you said, for all of our viewers to go watch or buy instantly. Again, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, it's my pleasure.
Hi, I'm Eduardo Neret with Campus Reform. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more great content like this, be sure to click the subscribe button right here. And if you're interested in joining the Campus Reform team as a correspondent, investigator, or tipster, click right here.